Dad's secret weapon. It was always his daughter. Why was everyone so quiet after the shot? The mountains swallowed sound like they knew what had just happened. 3,200 meters, 6 seconds of flight through thin Colorado air, and then silence. The kind that doesn't ask for applause, only acknowledgement. A single target dropped where he stood, a distant silhouette folding into dust. The bullet had traveled farther than most men could even see, and the voice that finally broke the radio silence wasn't celebrating. It was trembling. Jesus Christ, who took that shot? Nobody expected the answer. Nobody turned toward the quiet woman in the back, the one they'd nicknamed Bookworm. She was supposed to be a medic, the one who bandaged the wounded, not someone who could make a shot that defied mathematics. But that day, every man at Fort Camden would learn that not every weapon is carried on your shoulder. Some are carried in silence. And hers had a name. Sarah Hayes. 6 months earlier, before anyone knew what she could do, a Black Hawk helicopter descended through mountain winds and dust clouds, settling onto the landing pad of Fort Camden, a scar of concrete and steel cut into Colorado's rugged terrain. The sun glared off razor wire. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and snow melt. From the command building, Captain Samantha Ward watched the helicopter's rotors carve the afternoon light into spinning shards. She wasn't expecting much. Supply drops, comm specialists, maybe another medic rotation. The base was bleeding morale. 8 men lost in the last month, all to precision shots. Someone out there was hunting American Rangers on their own soil. As the soldiers disembarked, one figure caught her eye. Not because she stood out, because she didn't. A woman in standard fatigues, compact frame, duffel on one shoulder, medical kit in the other hand. Her posture was calm, symmetrical, balanced, too balanced. The kind that comes from knowing angles, not regulations. Ward watched her scan the perimeter as she walked. Subtle head turns, eyes tracing vantage points, cover positions, elevation lines. It wasn't the kind of awareness you learned in medical training. It was the kind you learned when you'd been hunted before. 10 minutes later, she stood in Ward's office, crisp, calm, precise. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes reporting for duty, ma'am. Assigned medical support, 3rd Ranger Battalion. Ward glanced over her personnel file. 26 years old. Top of her class in battlefield trauma, triage, and emergency surgery. A spotless record. Too spotless. Ward looked up. Your file says advanced trauma certification. That's impressive for your age. Sarah nodded once. Yes, ma'am. There was something in those eyes, deep brown, still but observant, like they were measuring more than the room, measuring the woman across from her. Ward leaned forward slightly. You should know something, Lieutenant. These Rangers have been under pressure for months. They've lost people. They're not gentle with newcomers, especially medical staff. Sarah's answer was quiet. I'm not here for gentle, ma'am. I'm here to keep them alive. Ward studied her face again but couldn't read it. She saw professionalism, calm, maybe fatigue. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the M1911 pistol carefully packed in Sarah's footlocker, its grip smooth from years of her father's hands. The initials carved into the barrel read simply, J.H. They called her Bookworm within 24 hours. The name started during the morning briefing. 30 Rangers in a dusty operations room, most of them hardened veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. Staff Sergeant Frank Reynolds, old school, battle-worn, introduced her with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Gentlemen, meet our new medic. Lieutenant Hayes here's gonna keep you breathing when things go sideways. Laughter followed, the kind that tests the new one. Private Thompson, young, loud, Texas accent sharp as a knife, raised his hand. Hey, Sarge. She know the difference between a tourniquet and a tactical reload. The room erupted, even Reynolds chuckled. Sarah just nodded once, polite, unmoved. No sarcasm, no defensiveness, just silence. Don't worry, Thompson, Reynolds added. She's probably read all about combat medicine in them textbooks. More laughter. And from that moment, Bookworm stuck. They thought she was harmless. Another smart medic who'd freeze under fire. Another pair of soft hands who could stop bleeding but not make a shot count. But they weren't paying attention. Because while they joked, Sarah's hands moved with the calm precision of someone who'd done this before, not just in sterile rooms but in chaos. When she wrapped bandages, her movements were efficient, fluid, exact. Not the textbook kind of exact. The lived kind. The kind taught by repetition, fear, and necessity. During mandatory weapons maintenance, she cleaned her M4 like everyone else, except she didn't just clean. She inspected barrel harmonics, checked scope alignment, felt trigger resistance like a musician tuning strings. No one noticed the subtle micro-adjustments, the way she calibrated sights to compensate for wind drift. No one saw her calculating. They only saw a medic with her head in a book. And maybe that's what kept her alive. Years before the war, before uniforms and call signs, the Colorado mountains were her classroom. 17-year-old Sarah lay prone on cold rock, her cheek pressed to the scope of an M40A1 rifle. Beside her, her father, Jack "Ghost" Hayes, watched with quiet pride. He was a legend in the Navy SEALs, a name whispered by men who measured distance in heartbeats. "Remember, Sarah," he said softly, his voice carrying over the wind. "At this range, you're not shooting a rifle, you're solving a physics problem." A steel plate glinted nearly 2 kilometers away. The wind curled through the valley, unpredictable, invisible. Sarah adjusted her sights, left .2 mils, elevation up 3. Jack's tone was patient but firm. "Feel the wind, not just here, along the whole path. The bullet doesn't know where it started, it only knows where it's going." She exhaled, the trigger broke like glass. The rifle cracked, a second later ping. Direct hit. Jack checked the rangefinder. 1,712 meters, dead center. "You just beat half my unit, kid." Sarah smiled faintly, lowering the rifle. "Then why not let me enlist?" Jack's expression changed. Not anger, something softer, almost regretful. "Because these skills come with weight. You don't teach someone to end life without teaching them what that means. I'm not raising a weapon, Sarah. I'm raising a protector." He looked at her with the solemnity of a man who'd seen too much. "The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody sees coming. Remember that." At Fort Camden, she remembered it every day. Her second week on base, she rode in a convoy to a smaller outpost, Checkpoint Delta. 4 vehicles, narrow mountain roads, perfect ambush terrain. She sat in the back seat beside Reynolds, pretending to study her med kit, but her eyes kept scanning the ridges. The terrain was familiar, too familiar. A glint of light flashed on the western ridge, just a flicker. Sun on glass, maybe, or maybe something else. Her breath caught. A scope reflection. For a heartbeat, she almost spoke. Then stopped. How would she explain it? A medic noticing sniper movement at 1,200 meters. Reynolds would laugh. Thompson would call her paranoid. So she stayed silent. 20 minutes later, the lead Humvee disappeared in an explosion. The sound hit like thunder. The road filled with screams, dust, and the rattle of gunfire. "Contact left," Reynolds shouted, diving for cover. Sarah moved on instinct, crawled toward the overturned vehicle, glass and shrapnel biting into her palms. 2 men down, one screaming, one not. She didn't think, just worked. Tourniquet, pressure, IV. But the thought hammered in her skull. I saw it coming. Reynolds took a round through his upper arm, blood blooming through his sleeve. He grinned through pain. "Guess you're getting your first taste of real combat medicine, Bookworm." Sarah didn't answer. Her silence wasn't from fear, it was from guilt. When the dust settled, 3 men were gone. And she couldn't stop seeing that flash of light. That night she sat alone outside the medical tent, the blood still on her sleeves. The mountains loomed silent, the same mountains her father once said would make her stronger. She wasn't sure if he was right. "I promised you, Dad," she whispered. "I promised I'd never let anyone die if I could prevent it." But which promise was she breaking, the one to heal or the one to act? Later in her quarters, she unlocked a small metal box and opened her father's old journal. His handwriting was tight, disciplined, unshakable. Sarah made her first 1,200-meter shot today. Wind 15 knots cross, adjusted perfectly. She understands the physics, but more importantly, the responsibility. "I told her, the shot you don't take is often the most important one." A photograph slipped loose between the pages. Her father, younger, sitting cross-legged in desert gear, rifle across his lap, oil fires burning behind him. Below it, another entry. "She can outshoot half my men, but she has something they don't: empathy. Maybe that's what will save her or break her." Sarah closed the journal and stared at the wall until dawn. She didn't sleep, couldn't, because the truth was simple and heavy. Sometimes saving lives meant more than bandages. Sometimes it meant becoming what you feared. 3 weeks passed. The Rangers still called her bookworm, but the laughter had dulled. They saw the way she worked, how she moved toward gunfire instead of away, how her hands never shook, even when stitching through blood and dirt. Still, no one knew who she really was. Not yet. And as the wind cut through the mountain valley that morning, she stood by the helipad again, the same one where she'd arrived weeks ago. Only this time, she wasn't looking at the dust or the distance. She was looking at the horizon, and wondering whether her father had known this moment would come, the one where she'd have to decide whether to remain the medic or become the weapon she'd been trained to be. Because somewhere out there, beyond those ridges, someone was watching them. Someone who understood wind, distance, and patience the same way she did. Someone trained. And before this was over, Sarah Hayes would have to meet that ghost, not in memory, but in the crosshairs. Why was the mountain so quiet that morning? Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. At Fort Camden, silence didn't mean peace. It meant someone out there was watching, waiting, measuring. Sarah Hayes stood on the outer ridge beside the perimeter wire, the cold biting through her gloves. Her breath fogged in the early light. Below her, the base hummed with subdued activity, ranger patrols heading out, mechanics shouting over engine noise, comms officers testing frequencies. Routine noise, but her instincts whispered otherwise. Something felt off. The wind direction was wrong for this much stillness. The birds that usually haunted the tree line were gone. She felt the same pressure she'd felt the day of the ambush, that invisible weight of being seen from somewhere she couldn't yet locate. She shifted her gaze toward the eastern ridges, 1,500 meters of jagged rock and snow. Good cover, multiple vantage points, and if she were setting up for a long shot, she would have chosen that exact slope. Her pulse slowed. Old training resurfaced, unwanted, automatic. Wind speed 5 knots southwest. Elevation differential 430 feet. Temperature 34 degrees. Ballistic drop negligible under 1,000 meters. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "The mountain doesn't hide enemies, Sarah. It hides opportunities. You just have to see which is which." She blinked the thought away. She was a medic now. She wasn't supposed to think like that anymore. But maybe, she thought bitterly, that's why people keep dying. At the morning briefing, Captain Ward's tone carried a tight edge. 3 more Rangers dead last night. Single shots, head and neck. The precision is," she hesitated, "inhuman." A low murmur rippled through the room. Reynolds sat stone-faced, jaw tight, arms crossed. "The analysis," Ward continued, "confirms what intel's been hinting at. This isn't random insurgent fire. It's a professional marksman, possibly trained abroad. SOCOM sending a tactical evaluation unit. They'll arrive by tomorrow morning." Reynolds muttered something under his breath, something about outsiders and interference. Sarah sat near the back, quiet as ever, but her mind was racing. A professional sniper on American soil, using techniques and distances that matched her father's style. Her chest tightened. No, it couldn't be. He was gone, but someone had learned. Someone was using his methods. And for the first time in years, Sarah wondered if her father's death, that so-called training accident at Quantico, had been something far more deliberate. That night she dreamed again. Her father stood on the firing range at Quantico, sunlight burning through the smoke. He was adjusting a rig, his face calm but distracted. She remembered calling out, "Dad, wait." But in the dream, her voice was trapped in her throat. The cable snapped. The platform gave way. He fell. And this time she saw what she hadn't seen then. A figure in the shadows of the observation tower, watching, unmoving, until her father hit the ground. She woke up gasping. The barracks were dark, the clock reading 03:27. Outside, snow had begun to fall. It came silently, soft, patient, like the world was covering something it didn't want to talk about. The next morning, 2 Black Hawk helicopters cut through the sky. SOCOM had arrived. From the infirmary window, Sarah watched them descend, blades slicing through falling snow, sending white spirals into the air. The men who stepped out weren't the usual kind. Broad shoulders, disciplined movement, faces hardened but quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from fear, it came from control. And leading them was a man with silver-streaked hair and a presence that filled the entire landing pad. He moved like he'd carried more weight than medals could honor. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Knight. Even before introductions, everyone on base seemed to stand a little straighter. Rumors about Knight traveled through the ranks like myths. SEAL Team 6 veteran, Delta trained, the kind of man who'd walked away from missions other people never came back from. Sarah watched him closely as Captain Ward greeted the team. Knight's expression was calm, assessing, but his eyes, sharp, almost surgical, scanned every face like he was taking inventory of souls. And for one fraction of a second, they met hers. He didn't smile, didn't frown, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Recognition, or the start of it. Personnel of Fort Camden, Ward began during the midday assembly. Lieutenant Colonel Knight and his evaluation unit will be conducting tactical readiness assessments over the next 72 hours. Cooperate fully. Knight stepped forward, his tone firm but measured. "I'm not here to criticize. I'm here to understand how the hell someone is killing American Rangers from a mile away on our own ground." His words landed like shrapnel. He gestured toward the map behind him, a grid of the surrounding mountains. "Your shooter is no amateur. Ballistics show distances exceeding 1,500 meters. Consistent grouping, controlled cadence. Whoever it is, they're methodical, they're disciplined. That's not insurgent behavior, that's military." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Sarah sat motionless, her hands clasped on the table, but inside her mind was burning with questions. If someone out there had her father's skills, where did they come from? And why now? Knight's eyes drifted across the room. For a heartbeat, they landed on Sarah again. His gaze lingered just long enough to make her pulse skip. Then he moved on. Later that day, during the medical evaluation, Knight's team moved through her aid station with professional scrutiny. One of them, Lieutenant Commander Carter, Naval Special Warfare Medical, reviewed her logs, asking routine questions. Then he paused on a case file. "Corporal Mitchell, sepsis recovery 23 days ago, drainage procedure performed in field." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "Helicopter evac was too far, it was the only option." Carter's brow furrowed. You made a surgical incision at exactly the correct anatomical depth under field conditions with basic tools. That's advanced trauma surgery. Sarah's voice remained steady. Field medicine manuals cover emergency drainage protocols, sir. He gave a small, curious smile. Manuals don't teach muscle memory, Lieutenant, but I suppose some people just learn fast. She nodded, silent, but behind her calm she felt it, the slow unraveling of her cover. Because that was the first time anyone had looked at her the way Knight had, not as a medic, but as something else entirely. That evening the mess hall buzzed with talk about the SOCOM team. Soldiers swapped stories about the drills, the evaluations, the interrogations. Everyone had an opinion, a theory. But when Sarah entered, the noise dimmed a little. Not because of her rank, because of what she represented: mystery. The woman who never bragged, never flinched, never spoke unless asked. Mitchell waved her over, his leg still bandaged but healing. "Hey, Doc," he said with a grin. "You hear, Knight's looking for the sniper, says the guy's ex-military. 14 kills, same signature, all headshots." Sarah froze mid-step. 14. Knight's voice echoed faintly from across the room. He was talking quietly with Captain Ward, but as he turned, his eyes met Sarah's again. There was something different this time. Not suspicion, recognition. "Do you know him or something?" Mitchell asked, noticing her reaction. Sarah forced a smile. "No, just thinking." But inside, her father's words echoed louder than ever. "The most powerful weapon, Sarah, is the one they don't know exists." That night the alarms shattered the calm. Gunfire. Short bursts, then screams. Sarah was out of bed before she was awake, grabbing her kit and sprinting through the barracks corridor. The cold slapped her face as she emerged into chaos. Lights flashing, orders shouted, the base alive with panic and movement. Captain Ward's voice cut through the comms. "Perimeter breach, East Sector. Medical team standby." Within minutes, wounded were carried in, 2 with chest wounds, 1 barely breathing. "Single shooter," Reynolds shouted, stumbling into the tent, blood across his sleeve. 1 shot per target, no misses, East Ridge. Sarah's hands moved on instinct, triaging, sealing wounds, calling for saline. But her mind was already calculating. Wind, distance, elevation. Same ridge, same method. She didn't want to admit it, but whoever that sniper was, they were good. Too good. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt since her father's death. Familiarity. When the last casualty stabilized, she stepped outside the aid tent, exhaling steam into the cold night. The snow had stopped. The mountains stood quiet again, their silence heavy with the echo of precision death. A voice came from behind her. "Lieutenant Hayes." She turned. Knight stood in the doorway, his coat dusted with frost, eyes unreadable. "I heard about your work tonight. Quick thinking saved 3 men. That chest decompression, textbook perfect." Sarah nodded. "Just doing my job, sir." Knight tilted his head slightly. "That particular technique isn't part of standard medical training for officers at your level." She hesitated. "Advanced trauma course, Fort Bragg." He studied her for a long moment, then shifted the subject entirely. "You're from Colorado, right?" "Yes, sir." "Beautiful country," he said quietly. "Good training ground for shooters. Your last name Hayes. Any relation to Jack Hayes? Navy SEAL, went by Ghost." Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He was my father." Knight nodded slowly, a hint of sadness softening his face. "I served with him once. Desert Storm. Best shot I ever saw. Saved my entire team at 2,100 meters. Damn fine man." Sarah's throat tightened. "Thank you, sir." Knight's gaze didn't waver. "I'm curious, Lieutenant. Why would the daughter of Jack Hayes, who I happen to know trained his children like operators, choose to serve as a medical officer instead of a marksman? The question hung in the cold air. Sarah met his eyes, because he taught me the difference between ending life and saving it. Knight nodded once slowly, respectfully. A worthy lesson, he said softly, but sometimes saving lives requires eliminating the threat first. He started to leave, then paused at the door. Tomorrow's evaluation includes a long-range precision drill. I'd like to see what you can do with a rifle, Lieutenant. Consider it field research. And just like that, he was gone. Sarah stood there for a long time after he left, the night pressing in around her. The base was quiet again, but something inside her was. She knew what tomorrow meant. Night wasn't testing her. He was calling her out. The secret she'd buried with her father was about to surface. And the mountain, cold, patient, silent, seemed to be watching, waiting to see whether she would honor her father's promise, or finally become the weapon he'd built her to be. Why was everyone staring at her? The morning light at Fort Camden had a strange sharpness to it, the kind that cut shadows into truth. Snow still clung to the edges of the helipad, glinting like cold steel. Soldiers moved faster than usual, boots crunching across gravel, the air alive with nervous energy. The SOCOM team was everywhere, assessing, observing, silently judging. Sarah Hayes moved through the organized chaos of the medical station, pretending to focus on inventory logs, but her pulse wouldn't slow. Knight's words from last night kept looping in her mind. Tomorrow's evaluation includes a precision drill. I'd like to see what you can do with a rifle. That wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. She knew exactly what would happen. The minute she touched a rifle, her mask would crack. The calm, compliant medic they thought they knew would disappear, replaced by something they wouldn't understand, a version of herself she'd sworn to bury. And yet somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that maybe it was time. Maybe hiding had gone on long enough. At 900 hours, the loudspeaker barked across the base. Personnel, report to the firing range for SOCOM readiness evaluation. Rangers filed out in formation, rifles slung, faces hard and expectant. Sarah trailed behind, clipboard in hand, blending in with the support staff. Captain Ward stood near the command canopy, briefing the arriving units. Today's evaluation focuses on weapons proficiency, environmental awareness, and tactical adaptability. SOCOM observers will oversee the exercises. Treat this as operational readiness. Reynolds stood beside her, arms folded, his expression carved from stone. He caught Sarah's eye for half a second and she saw it. The warning, the unspoken plea, don't step out of line. But Knight's presence dominated everything. He moved through the crowd like he belonged to another world, not shouting, not rushing, just watching. The kind of quiet command that made everyone instinctively straighten their posture. When he finally turned towards Sarah, the look he gave her wasn't casual. It was deliberate. Lieutenant Hayes, I'd like you to assist with equipment verification before we begin. Reynolds blinked. Sir, she's medical personnel. I can assign a qualified. Knight cut him off. I requested her specifically. That single sentence silenced everyone. The Barrett M82A1 lay on the table like an artifact, 5 feet of matte steel and authority. A rifle that demanded respect even from men who'd spent their lives in combat. Knight gestured toward it. We'll start with a system check. Make sure the optics are aligned, scope calibrated, recoil dampeners intact. Sarah froze for half a heartbeat. He wasn't testing equipment, he was testing her. Understood, sir. She set her medical bag aside, knelt beside the rifle and began the inspection. Her fingers found the points of contact automatically. Receiver alignment perfect. Bolt assembly clean. Barrel torque slightly off by a hair's breadth. She adjusted it without thinking. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, unconsciously precise. the kind of motion that doesn't come from manuals or checklists. It comes from a lifetime of repetition. Reynolds watched from a few feet away, his jaw tightening with every second. He knew what he was seeing and he didn't like it, not because it was wrong, but because it was impossible to explain. "You've done this before," Knight said quietly, observing her hands. Sarah didn't look up. "Every soldier should understand their weapon, sir. It saves lives." He smiled faintly. "That's not how most medics talk about rifles." Her fingers hesitated for the briefest moment, then continued. "Maybe most medics haven't lost enough lives to know the difference." For a moment, neither spoke. The mountains behind them seemed to listen. When she finished, Knight leaned over the table, inspecting her adjustments. Scope alignments perfect, barrel harmonics corrected. He turned to Reynolds. "I've seen trained operators take longer to calibrate an M82. Reynolds' face was unreadable. "She's detail-oriented, sir." Knight's gaze returned to Sarah. "Detail-oriented saves lives. Would you demonstrate proper firing position for my team, Lieutenant?" Reynolds stepped forward instantly. "Sir, with respect, that's not necessary. She's not certified for—" "Reynolds," Knight interrupted, his tone level but sharp. "I asked her to demonstrate a position, not fire the weapon. I trust she can handle that." Ward, arriving mid-conversation, glanced between them. "What's the issue?" Knight's reply was smooth. "Just ensuring procedural thoroughness, Captain. Lieutenant Hayes has already inspected the weapon. I'd like her to demonstrate positioning, standard knowledge for all personnel." Ward's eyes met Sarah's. There was curiosity there now, not doubt. "Go ahead, Lieutenant, show them." There was no escaping it. Sarah exhaled once, lowered herself onto the shooting mat, and settled behind the rifle. The crowd quieted. The moment her cheek met the stock, everything else disappeared. Noise, doubt, fear gone. Her body aligned automatically, legs angled perfectly, elbows planted, shoulder firm against the recoil pad. Her breathing slowed, matching her heartbeat. She adjusted the scope with 3 small micro-movements, exactly as her father had taught her. Knight's expression changed. He'd seen thousands of shooters, but this was different. Her alignment was instinctive, not learned. Her posture wasn't rehearsed, it was lived. "Eye relief?" he asked. 2 inches, optimal for this optic. Scopes zeroed for 600 meters. Crosshair steady, 2 clicks left, windage adjustment recommended. Her tone was calm, clinical, but the range had gone still. Even the rangers who'd once mocked her now stared like they were seeing a ghost. Knight straightened. "Flawless form, Lieutenant Hayes, take a shot." The words hit her like a bullet. Every muscle tensed. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice tight. "Sir, that's against protocol." Knight didn't look at him. "She's qualified." Reynolds' voice rose. "She's medical staff." Knight turned, eyes calm but final. "She's military." Silence. Then the soft click of a safety disengaging. Sarah stared down the scope. The 600-meter target shimmered in the distance, heat waves distorting its outline. Her finger hovered near the trigger, breath slowing until her pulse felt like a metronome. She could hear her father again. "When the moment comes, Sarah, you'll know what to do." Her finger tightened. The Barrett roared. The sound thundered through the valley, echoing off the ridges. Then nothing, silence. Through the spotting scope, Knight's assistant called out, voice cracking. "Target center hit, dead center." Knight didn't blink, he just nodded once. "Perfect." Around them, the silence fractured into whispers. Reynolds stared at the target through binoculars, disbelief carved into his face. The hole was precise, impossibly so. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly, exhaling. Her hands didn't shake. Reynolds muttered, "That's not possible." Knight's tone was soft but carried the weight of authority. "It's not only possible, Sergeant, it's art." He turned to Sarah. "How far have you shot before, Lieutenant?" "Far enough to know distance isn't what matters," she said quietly. "Control is." And for the first time since her arrival, someone looked at her and didn't see a medic. They saw a weapon. But Knight wasn't finished. His instincts told him there was more beneath the surface. "Let's stretch it," he said. 1,200 meters. Reynolds' composure cracked. "Sir." "Stand down, Sergeant." The crowd murmured. 1,200 meters wasn't just a test. It was a statement, a shot that separated amateurs from legends. Sarah hesitated only a moment before speaking. "I can make that shot." Knight gave a slow nod. "Then make it." She reloaded, adjusted scope elevation, wind drift, temperature. The movements were muscle memory. Around her, every breath felt suspended. She exhaled. Squeezed. The Barrett thundered again. Knight lifted his binoculars, scanning the far ridge. When he spoke, his voice was hushed, reverent. "Center mass, 1,200 meters, perfect." The range erupted in disbelief. Thompson whispered, She's not human." Reynolds looked sick, like the ground beneath him had shifted. Knight lowered his binoculars, eyes fixed on Sarah. That breathing rhythm, the wind compensation pattern, the trigger discipline, where did you learn that? Sarah met his gaze. "My father taught me." Knight's eyes narrowed. "Jack Hayes' ghost." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The truth was already there, hanging in the cold mountain air. Gasps rippled through the Rangers. Even Ward stepped closer, her expression caught between awe and disbelief. Reynolds took a step back, color draining from his face. Months of mockery, condescension, doubt, all collapsing under a single truth. Sarah Hayes, the quiet medic, the outsider, the one they'd called Bookworm, was the daughter of one of the most legendary snipers in military history. And she had just proven she'd inherited every ounce of that skill. Knight crouched beside her, his voice low. "Your father was a legend. You just matched his record in under 2 minutes." Sarah's expression didn't change. "My father taught me these skills to protect people, not to impress them." Knight smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're more like him than you think. He said the same thing to me once, right before saving my entire team." He stood, calling to the others. "Lieutenant Hayes will join the counter-sniper evaluation team for the remainder of this assessment." Reynolds stepped forward, shaking his head. "Sir, she's not trained for." Knight's tone cut through the protest like a blade. "She's trained, you just never saw it." The sergeant fell silent. That night the base felt different. The whispers didn't stop. Bookworm wasn't a joke anymore. She was a ghost in her own right. Sarah sat alone in her quarters, the weight of her father's photograph in her hand. For the first time, she didn't look away from his eyes. "Why'd you teach me, Dad?" she murmured. "You said I'd know when it mattered. Was this what you meant?" Outside, the wind howled through the valley, low, distant, almost like an answer. In the darkness, she opened his old journal again. On the final page, in his unmistakable handwriting, was a line she'd never noticed before. "The day Sarah stops hiding is the day she'll save lives her own way. The only thing that can stop her is herself." Her breath caught. Because tomorrow, the fight would find them again. And this time she wouldn't hide. Not from who she was. Not from the man in the mountains, watching through his scope. Not from the truth that her father's secret weapon, his greatest shot, had always been her. Why did the air feel heavier that night? Fort Camden had known fear before, the kind that comes with darkness, with waiting for a bullet you can't see. But tonight, it was different. It wasn't fear of the unknown. It was fear of certainty. Everyone now knew what Sarah Hayes could do. And sometimes, knowledge changes everything. She felt it in every glance that followed her through the mess hall, every half-finished whisper. Soldiers who once dismissed her now looked at her with something between respect and unease. Not awe, something sharper. Reynolds wouldn't meet her eyes. Ward spoke to her differently now, careful, measured like someone handling a live charge. And Knight watched her with quiet satisfaction, like he'd just uncovered a weapon he'd been looking for all along. By midnight, snow had started again, soft, relentless, silent. Sarah stood at the perimeter fence, the wind biting her face, scanning the ridgelines. Her breath formed small ghosts in the cold air. Knight's words from earlier replayed in her mind. The day will come when you'll have to choose to heal or to stop the bleeding another way. She didn't want to believe that choice was real, but out there, somewhere in those mountains, a sniper waited, a phantom trained like her father, someone who was hunting them methodically, one by one. And she couldn't stop asking herself the question that haunted her most. What if the man behind that scope wasn't just copying her father? What if he'd been trained by him? The thought made her chest tighten. Her father's legacy wasn't supposed to kill, it was supposed to protect. But if that legacy was being twisted, then maybe it was time she faced it head-on. The next morning, Fort Camden woke to the sound of engines. Knight had ordered a forward reconnaissance. They'd found new shell casings near the East Ridge, .338 Lapua rounds, fired from elevation, grouped perfectly. Knight stood beside the map table, his tone calm but surgical. Our shooters using long-range mountain positioning, calculated, patient. They've studied you. Every movement, every rotation pattern. That means this base isn't just under attack, it's under surveillance. Ward frowned. You're saying we're compromised? Knight nodded. He knows our routines. He's not just aiming at soldiers, he's testing reactions. He's studying us. Sarah leaned forward, voice low. Testing reactions means gathering intelligence, timing reloads, rescue speed, medical response windows. Knight finished her thought. Exactly. Whoever this is, he's not killing at random, he's rehearsing. The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. The next attack was already planned. Knight turned toward Sarah. Lieutenant Hayes, your background makes you uniquely qualified to understand how this shooter thinks. I want you on overwatch duty tonight. Reynolds snapped instantly. Sir, that's insane. She's a medic, not a ranger. Knight's reply was sharp. She's the only one who can read him. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her decision was already made. At 1900 hours, the mountains turned dark. The wind howled through the valley like a restless animal. Sarah lay prone in the snow, Barrett rifle steady on a ridge above the base. Night vision lenses glowed faint green in her scope. Her fingers were steady, but her chest felt tight with the weight of what she was doing. She wasn't meant to be up here. She was supposed to be the one waiting in the aid station, not the one ready to pull the trigger. Through her calm, Knight's voice came soft but firm. Stay sharp, Hayes. You see movement, you call it first. No shots unless confirmed. Copy that. The radio hissed, then went quiet. For the next 2 hours, she lay perfectly still. The snow built around her, the silence pressed in. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement on the opposite ridge. Just a shadow, barely visible through the storm. But it wasn't random. The way it moved, patient, methodical, it was the movement of someone trained to blend into the earth. Her finger brushed the trigger guard, steady. Then through the crosshairs, she caught something impossible. A small reflection, not from a weapon, but from a chain around the person's neck. A dog tag. Her heart stopped. Through her scope, she zoomed in and her pulse stuttered. The name wasn't clear, just a fragment, but it was enough. Hays. Her breath caught. No, it wasn't possible. The man in her scope turned slightly, just enough for her to see his face. Older, weathered, but those eyes she'd known her whole life. Her father's eyes. The world seemed to tilt. Her grip tightened on the rifle. Every rational thought screamed he's dead, but her instincts said otherwise. The way he held the weapon, the exact, perfect control, The timing of his movements, those were her father's teachings. "Hayes, report," Knight's voice came through. She didn't answer, couldn't. "Do you have visual?" Her lips trembled. I have movement, East Ridge, single silhouette." "Can you confirm?" She stared through the scope, her breath fogging the eyepiece. "I can't," she whispered. Knight's voice hardened. "Lieutenant, that's an order. Confirm target or stand down." Her finger hovered over the trigger. But her heart was already breaking. Because if she was right, if her father had somehow survived, then every shot, every death, every nightmare in these mountains had come from the man who once taught her that the purpose of precision was to protect. The comm hissed again. "Lieutenant, do you copy?" Her voice cracked. "Sir, I need 10 seconds." "Hayes, this isn't." She muted the channel. Her mind raced. The government report had said training accident, a snapped cable, fatal fall, closed casket burial. But what if it hadn't been an accident? What if he'd been taken, recruited, rewritten? She remembered his journal, the line about responsibility, the entry that said, "There are men who will turn protectors into predators if you let them." She lowered her eye from the scope and blinked hard, snowflakes freezing on her lashes. Her breath shook. She couldn't take the shot. Not yet. Because somewhere in her heart, beneath the grief, was a whisper, "He's alive for a reason." Back at base, Knight paced the command tent, headset pressed to his ear. "Hayes, respond." No answer. Ward leaned over the table. "You think she froze?" Knight shook his head slowly. "No, Hayes doesn't freeze." Reynolds' voice cut in, sharp with fear. "Then what the hell is she doing out there?" Knight didn't respond. He just stared at the ridge line through the tent flap, his jaw tight. Something about the pattern, the timing of the shots, the precision of the attacks had been bothering him for days. The shooter wasn't random. He was disciplined. And now that Hayes was on Overwatch, the silence made sense. Because maybe, for the first time, the shooter was hesitating too. Hours later, the storm broke. The moon slipped through the clouds, pale and cold. Sarah was still lying in the snow, rifle by her side, hands numb. She'd lost the target's position. No movement for nearly an hour. The mountains were quiet again. Then a soft crack. Not thunder, not a branch. A rifle. The snow beside her face erupted in a small burst of ice. She rolled instantly, scanning the tree line. The shot hadn't come from the East Ridge, it had come from below, near the valley floor. Her heart hammered. He'd moved. He'd flanked her. Training took over. She crawled behind cover, recalibrated the scope, and returned fire, one shot, clean, controlled. Silence. Then a second shot, closer. This time it grazed her shoulder, tearing through her sleeve. Her breath caught, pain burning hot and sharp. And through the ringing in her ears, a voice came over her comm, distorted, low but unmistakable. "Stand down, Sarah." Her blood ran cold. It was Knight. It wasn't anyone on her team. It was him. She pressed her hand against her wound, the cold numbing her skin. "Dad," she whispered. Static, then that same voice, calm but heavy. "You shouldn't have come here. They'll use you the same way they used me." Tears blurred her vision. "You're alive, how?" "No time, leave the mountain, now." Her throat tightened. "You're the one killing them." Silence, then softly. "They're not who you think they are." Her breath caught. "You're wrong, these are Rangers, soldiers." "So was I, so were the men I trained with. They sent us to die, Sarah. When I survived, they turned me into something else." Her hands trembled. "What are you saying?" "You were right to choose medicine, but you came back into a war that doesn't deserve you. Get out before it swallows you too." His voice broke slightly, the first time she'd ever heard fear in it. "You're my daughter. You were never supposed to see me like this." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen in the snow, her father's voice echoing in her skull. The man she'd mourned for years was alive but lost, a weapon wearing her father's face. She didn't move for a long time, not until the faint sound of chopper blades began to rise over the ridge. Knight's extraction team. She switched her radio back on. "Base, this is Hayes, I'm hit, east sector clear, shooter disengaged." Ward's voice burst through. "Copy that, med team en route." But Knight's voice overlapped hers, quieter but sharper. "Hayes, what did you see?" Sarah hesitated. I couldn't confirm target identity, sir." Knight's tone dropped. "That's not what I asked." Her silence said everything. By dawn, she sat in the infirmary, shoulder bandaged, staring at the mountains through the frost-glazed window. Knight entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "You saw something," he said. Sarah didn't look at him. A shadow could have been anything. Knight studied her for a long moment. Then, "You're lying." She turned to face him, eyes cold. "You're the one who taught me to hide, sir." Knight stepped closer, his voice low. "Who was it?" Sarah hesitated. Her lips parted but no sound came. Finally she said, "No one you need to find." Knight exhaled through his nose, unreadable. "You're protecting someone." "Just the truth," she said quietly. He watched her another moment, then nodded. "You're your father's daughter, all right." When he left, Sarah looked back toward the mountains. The dawn light painted them gold, but all she could see were ghosts, hers, her father, and the truth caught between them. And somewhere out there, hidden in the snow, a rifle waited. A father waiting for his daughter to decide what side of the scope she belonged on. Why was the file sealed? Knight had seen classified files before, thousands of them, but this one felt different. The deeper he dug, the more resistance he met. Encrypted memos, redacted paragraphs, entire reports missing dates, names, signatures, like someone had rewritten history one line at a time. The name on the folder was simple. HAYES, Jack Operative TRMNATED, Training Incident QANTICO. Except the word TRMNATED didn't sit right with him. Not in this context. Not for a man like Ghost Hayes. He scrolled through the pages, eyes narrowing. Medical examiner's signature missing. Body custody chain missing. Cause of death classified. That was all he needed to know. Jack Hayes hadn't died in a training accident. He disappeared. And now his daughter, his mirror, was out there on the same mountain he'd once trained on, standing in the path of something much bigger than anyone had told her. Knight leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His gut had been whispering the same thing since the day she took that shot on the range. This isn't coincidence. It's consequence. Sarah Hayes woke up before dawn. Her shoulder throbbed from the graze, but the pain was secondary. What she couldn't shake was his voice, her father's voice. The way it cracked when he said, "You were never supposed to see me like this." That wasn't the voice of a ghost. That was the voice of a man trapped inside something he couldn't control. She sat on the edge of her bunk, the bandage pulling at her skin. The snow outside reflected pale morning light through the frosted window. For the first time since arriving at Fort Camden, she didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like a daughter again, a daughter with a mission she never asked for. Ward entered quietly, holding a data tablet. "You should be resting, Lieutenant." Sarah forced a thin smile. "You know I don't sleep much." Ward hesitated, then sat beside her. "Knight told me you saw movement on the ridge. He's convinced the shooter's ex-special forces." Sarah stared at the floor. "He's not wrong." Ward studied her expression. "You know something." Sarah's lips parted, but the words got stuck in her throat. How could she explain it? That the man they were hunting, the ghost in the mountains, was the same man who'd once taught her how to shoot tin cans off a fence post before dinner. Ward reached out, her voice soft. "You don't have to carry this alone, Hayes." Sarah looked up slowly, her eyes glassy but steady. I think I do. By afternoon, Knight called her into the command tent. The mood was colder, heavier. He didn't bother with small talk. He just slid a folder across the table. Her father's folder. Sarah froze. I pulled this from D.C., Knight said. Took some favors I can't afford to use again. Thought you should see it. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. The pages inside were worn, photocopied too many times. And halfway through, a photograph. Her father standing beside Knight, both younger, both smiling in desert light. Below it, a handwritten note. Project Echo, Phase IV, Behavioral Target Conditioning. Sarah's voice trembled. What is this? Knight exhaled slowly. Echo was a classified operation, unofficial. It started after the early drone failures in Iraq. The Pentagon wanted a human solution, perfect precision without hesitation. They recruited marksmen who'd lost their edge or their purpose. Hayes volunteered. Her heart clenched. He wouldn't. Knight raised a hand. He believed he could control it, that he could teach soldiers how to use empathy as precision, not eliminate it, but someone else took over. They stripped that empathy away, turned him into a machine. Sarah stared down at the photo. Her father's smile seemed different now, rehearsed. Knight's voice softened. He disappeared when Echo was shut down. I assumed he was dead until your shot. Sarah blinked hard. My shot. Knight nodded. The moment you fired that Barrett on the range, our satellite system flagged the acoustic pattern. It matched one used in the Echo tests. The sound profile was identical to your father. Her stomach twisted. You think he heard it? Knight met her eyes. I think it woke him up. That night Sarah couldn't stay inside. The base felt suffocating, too many eyes, too many questions she couldn't answer. She slipped through the back gate, past the guard post, and into the forested slope behind the perimeter wire. The snow crunched softly under her boots. The cold bit at her lungs, but the silence was grounding. She followed the old path her father used to take when they'd hike together, before the uniforms, before the war. He used to tell her that the mountains held memories if you knew how to listen. Halfway up, she found an old hunting blind overlooking the valley. From there, the base lights shimmered faintly below, like a city under glass. She crouched inside and took out the object she'd been hiding since the night of her arrival, her father's M1911, the one with the carved initials. JH. She held it in her hands, running her thumb over the grooves. The metal was cold, but the memory wasn't. She remembered the first time he'd let her hold it. She was 14. It's not a weapon, he'd said. It's a responsibility. She believed him then. She still wanted to. But now, staring at the weapon that once symbolized protection, all she saw was everything she'd lost because of it. Back at Fort Camden, Knight stood with Captain Ward over a new satellite image. A heat signature, faint, but human, had been detected northeast of the base, near the valley where Sarah's signal had last gone dead the night before. Ward frowned. Could be him. Knight shook his head. He's too smart to light himself up. That's not a mistake, it's a message. Ward looked uneasy. You think it's for her? Knight nodded slowly. She's the only one he'd break silence for. At 200 hours, Sarah heard it. A faint crackle on her field radio. The same frequency her father used to use when they'd train in the mountains. A private band, long deactivated. She hesitated, then switched it on. This is Hayes. Static, then a voice, calm, low. I told you to leave, Sarah. Her heart jumped. I can't. You don't understand what they're building here. Her pulse quickened. What are you talking about? Echo never ended. It changed names, faces. Camden isn't a defense base, it's a test ground. They're rebuilding the system I tried to destroy. Sarah shook her head. No, that's not possible. Knight wouldn't. Knight doesn't know. He was removed after I refused their orders, but Ward. He paused. She was part of it back then. She's still feeding them data. Every casualty, every bullet report, it's all being logged into Echo's network. Sarah's stomach dropped. You're saying they're using us to refine it, to perfect it, the next generation of human precision, without hesitation, without conscience. They're building soldiers who don't feel. Her hands trembled on the radio. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can stop it. You're the proof it failed. His voice softened. You inherited the precision but not the detachment. That's what they wanted. That's what they couldn't replicate. Tears welled in her eyes. Dad, I can bring you in. Night can. Night can't fix what's already in motion. They'll silence anyone who knows, including you. Her breath shook. Then what do I do? Find the vault. It's under the comm station. Everything you need to end this is inside. The transmission cut. By sunrise, Sarah was back inside the perimeter. No one had noticed her absence, not yet. She went straight to the comms building, heart pounding, pretending to be checking on an injured radio tech. The underground access hatch was exactly where her father had said it would be, beneath the old generator room, half buried in frost. She pried it open quietly, the hinges squealing in protest. A narrow tunnel led downward, the walls reinforced with steel and cold air that smelled of oil and secrets. At the bottom, a small control room, computers, storage drives, servers humming softly in the dark. The label on one terminal read, Project Echo, Reconstructive Behavioral Model. Her father had been telling the truth. She plugged in her field tablet, bypassed encryption, and opened the directory. Dozens of files appeared, all labeled with familiar names: Ranger IDs, combat footage, bodycam logs. Each tagged with the same metadata signature, Echo PHASEV. They'd been collecting data through every engagement, every wound, every casualty she'd treated. It wasn't random, it was design. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't just part of the cleanup, she'd been the variable, the medic whose compassion could be measured. Her father had been right, they were using her. She didn't hear Knight enter until his voice broke the silence. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this place. Sarah spun around, weapon half raised. Knight stood in the doorway, calm but unreadable. He wasn't aiming at her yet. How long have you known? She asked, voice shaking. Long enough, he said quietly. I found the original orders 2 weeks ago, but I needed proof. Now we have it. Her expression hardened. Then why keep me in the dark? Knight stepped closer. Because they're watching. Ward reports directly to DC. If she knew we were onto her, she'd scrub the data. Sarah blinked. You're saying you're not part of it? He shook his head. I was part of the old Echo. I thought it ended when your father disappeared. I was wrong. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small drive. This contains everything we need: deployment logs, funding channels, operation reports. But it's incomplete. The full archive's in the vault server. Sarah stared at him. You want my help? Knight met her gaze. No, I need it. You're the only one who can navigate that system. It's keyed to Hayes' family biometric data. Her pulse quickened. You're saying they built the program using us? He nodded grimly. Your father's precision, your empathy, 2 halves of one equation. She swallowed hard. And what happens when both halves meet again? Knight's voice softened. That's what we're about to find out. Outside, alarms blared. The base lights flickered red. Ward's voice erupted through the intercom. All units, security breach. North Gate compromised. Knight's eyes darted toward the door. He's here. Sarah's heart dropped. My father. Knight loaded his sidearm. We move now. Sarah looked once more at the server, the glow of its screen reflecting in her eyes. Then she followed Knight up the ladder, the cold air hitting them like a slap as they emerged into chaos. Gunfire echoed from the northern ridge. Searchlights cut across snow. And through the blinding light, Sarah could see him, moving with impossible grace, firing with the same calm rhythm she knew by heart. Her father, the ghost she wasn't ready to face. Not as a daughter, not as a soldier, but as something caught between both. Why did the snow feel louder than gunfire? Each flake hit the ground like static, soft but restless. The air at Fort Camden was chaos, floodlights cutting through storm haze, sirens screaming across the base, soldiers shouting orders that vanished into the wind. But beneath all of that, Sarah could hear it, the faint rhythm she knew by heart. 3 shots. Pause. 2 more. A long silence. That was her father's pattern, the same cadence he used when teaching her to shoot tin cans off fence posts as a kid. He'd always said the pauses weren't hesitation, they were mercy. Now they sounded like a countdown. Knight and Sarah moved fast through the narrow service tunnels beneath the northern sector, flashlights slicing through the dark. The ground trembled faintly with distant explosions. Small, surgical detonations meant to disrupt communications, not destroy. "He's not attacking the base," Knight muttered. "He's isolating it." Sarah's voice was tight. "He's cutting them off from help." Knight nodded grimly, "and driving us toward him." They reached the end of the tunnel, where a maintenance hatch led out onto the snowy ridgeline. Knight forced it open and crouched low, scanning the horizon. Below them, Fort Camden burned in fragments, small fires flickering in the wind, soldiers moving like shadows under strobing lights. And above, on the far ridge, a single silhouette stood against the moonlight, perfectly still. Rifle slung across his shoulder, watching, waiting. Jack Hayes. Sarah's breath caught. Even from this distance, she knew. The way he shifted his weight, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the stillness that wasn't cold, just deliberate. He wasn't hiding. He wanted to be seen. Knight raised his binoculars. "He's not shooting." Sarah whispered, "He's waiting for me." Knight turned toward her. "If you go up there alone, he'll—" She cut him off, her tone quiet but firm. "He won't kill me." Knight searched her face, saw the conviction in her eyes and something else. Fear, not of dying but of the truth. Finally he nodded. "I'll cover you from here. You've got 15 minutes before Ward's security teams sweep the ridge. After that, everything changes." Sarah checked her weapon, secured her coat and started up the slope. The climb was brutal, snow knee-deep, wind biting through every layer. She could feel her pulse in her throat, the burn in her lungs, but she didn't stop. Not until the world went quiet again, the base far below, the moonlight sharp and silver. He was waiting at the top, standing beside a shattered pine tree, rifle lowered, face half hidden beneath a frost-covered hood. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just stared at each other, the soldier and the ghost. Then he said her name. Softly. "Sarah." It broke her, just the sound of it. "Dad," her voice cracked, the word foreign and fragile after all these years. He smiled faintly, older, weathered, but the same. "You shouldn't have come." Tears stung her eyes. "You shouldn't have disappeared." He lowered his hood slowly, the years carved deep into his face, exhaustion, regret, something darker. "I tried to keep you away from this." "You failed," she whispered. He looked past her toward the burning base below. "They found a new way to use me. Thought I could control it this time. Thought I could rewrite the program from the inside." Sarah shook her head. "Echo, you helped rebuild it." His jaw tightened. "No, I tried to dismantle it. But when I refused to finish the new targeting system, they erased me, changed my records, told the world I was dead." He knelt, drawing something in the snow with his gloved finger, a symbol, the Echo insignia. "Ward wasn't supposed to be here. She's feeding them real-time data. They're using this base to refine the final sequence, emotional suppression through neuropattern modeling." Her voice shook. You're telling me they're building soldiers who can't feel." He looked up at her, eyes full of sorrow. "They already have. I was the prototype." The silence between them felt colder than the mountain air. Sarah's breath came uneven. "So the kills, the ambushes." He nodded slowly. "Simulations. They wanted me to prove I could eliminate without emotional hesitation. They watched every shot, every heartbeat, until I couldn't stand it anymore." Sarah stared at him, disbelief and horror twisting inside her. "You killed your own men." His eyes closed. "I killed data points, that's what they called them." Her voice trembled with anger. "They were people." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I stopped." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Sarah whispered, "You could have come home." He looked away. "I did for one day. They tracked me, threatened to recruit you if I didn't go back." Her heart clenched. "So you stayed away to protect me." He nodded. "You were the only thing they couldn't calculate, the only variable with a soul." Tears blurred her vision. "You think that makes me proud?" He stepped closer, voice trembling. "I didn't want pride, I wanted you safe." She stepped back, shaking her head. "You call this safe? You turned me into you. You made me exactly what they wanted." "Sarah." "No," the word echoed through the trees. "You taught me to shoot before I could even drive. You taught me to see distance like math. You made me a soldier before I ever wanted to be one." Her voice broke. "And now you're telling me I was part of their experiment." He lowered his gaze. "I never meant for it to go this far." Her hand shook, but it did. The sound of engines echoed from below, distant helicopters rising, searchlights cutting through the valley fog. Knight's voice came faintly through her earpiece. "Hayes, extraction teams inbound. You're out of time." She ignored it. Jack's eyes flicked toward the sky. "They're coming for me." "They'll kill you," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's the point." "No," her voice hardened. "You're coming with me, you can testify, you can end this." His expression changed, not fear but peace. "They won't let me live, Sarah. I know too much." "I don't care," she said. "We'll find a way." He shook his head. "You still think this world works on mercy." "Then let's make it," she whispered. For the first time, he looked at her the way he used to, not as a soldier, but as his little girl. And that's when she saw it, the faint red laser dancing across his chest. Her instincts screamed. "Sniper!" She lunged forward, pushing him down just as the shot cracked through the night. The bullet tore through the air where his head had been. Knight's voice roared through her calm. "Hayes, hostile on your 6, Ward's team in the field." Her heart dropped. "Ward. Move now." She rolled behind a boulder, dragging her father with her. He groaned, clutching his shoulder, grazed. "Stay down," she hissed. Through her scope, she scanned the tree line below and froze. Ward's unit was advancing, tactical lights sweeping the ridge, weapons raised. She clicked her radio. "Captain Ward, hold your fire, he's surrendering." No response. A second later, the loudspeaker crackled. Ward's voice echoed through the cold. "Lieutenant Hayes, step away from the target." Sarah's chest tightened. "He's not the enemy. He's a national threat. Orders from D.C." Her father coughed, blood flecking his glove. "They won't stop. You have to finish this, Sarah." "No," she whispered. "Lieutenant Hayes," Ward's voice snapped. "You have 10 seconds to comply or we open fire." Knight's voice cut through on a private channel, low and urgent. "Sarah, listen to me. Ward's using protocol override. She's here to erase both of you." Sarah's throat tightened. "Then what?" "You make the shot first." She froze. "You want me to kill her?" "If you don't, she'll kill him and you." She looked at her father, his eyes calm, resigned. "You can't save me," he said softly, "but you can save them." Tears streamed down her face. "Don't ask me to do this." He reached up, placing his hand gently on her cheek. You were my best shot, Sarah, because you knew when not to pull the trigger. Then he pushed her hand away, the universal signal to retreat. Before she could stop him, he stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle slung low, hands raised. The red dots multiplied across his chest. Dad, no. Gunfire split the air. Everything after that came in fragments. The recoil of her rifle as she fired back on instinct. Night shouting in her earpiece. Ward's voice cutting out mid-command. Snow exploding in bursts of red and white. And then silence. Sarah crawled through the snow toward her father. He was lying on his side, breath shallow, eyes half open. The moonlight reflected off the blood spreading across his chest. She pressed her hands over the wound, voice trembling. "Stay with me." He smiled faintly, "Always trying to save me." "Don't talk." "You did it, Sarah," his breath hitched. "You made the right call." Her tears fell onto his sleeve. There was no right call. He coughed once weakly, then make one anyway. His eyes found hers one last time. "End it, end them. Don't let them make another me." And then his hand went still. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, sacred. The kind of silence that carries every word left unsaid. By dawn, the shooting had stopped. Ward's team was gone. Knight's forces had secured the ridge. The base lay broken but alive. Sarah sat alone beside her father's body, the snow falling gently around them. The world felt quieter now, like the mountain was mourning with her. Knight approached slowly, removing his hat. "I'm sorry." She didn't look up. "They'll cover it up again, won't they?" He sighed. "Not this time. We've got the data, the recordings, Ward's transmissions. It's enough to bury the project for good." She nodded faintly, but not enough to bring him back. Knight knelt beside her. "He saved a lot of lives tonight, including mine." Sarah stared at the horizon. He just didn't know how to save his own. Knight placed a hand on her shoulder. "What are you going to do now?" She looked down at the rifle beside her, then at her blood-stained hands. Her voice was barely a whisper, the only thing he taught me that still makes sense. Knight frowned. "What's that?" She stood slowly, the wind carrying her words away. "To protect those who can't protect themselves." As she walked down the mountain, the storm eased. And though she didn't look back, she could feel him there, not as the ghost who haunted her, but as the father who finally let her go. Why did victory feel like grief? The sun rose over Fort Camden in thin, cold light, turning the snowfields gold for the first time in weeks. Helicopters hovered above the base, their rotors chopping through the stillness. From a distance it looked almost peaceful, until you saw the smoke curling from the northern ridge, the broken vehicles, the dark stains in the snow. Sarah Hayes watched from the infirmary steps, bandaged shoulders stiff beneath her jacket. The med tents overflowed with men who owed their lives to a fight they didn't understand. Everyone called it a counterinsurgency breach. That was the official phrase: clean, sanitized, the kind of words used when truth was too heavy to carry. She looked toward the slope where her father had fallen. They'd taken his body away before dawn, wrapped in the same olive canvas he'd once used to clean his rifle. No ceremony, no flag, just silence. Knight stood beside her, face drawn, coat unbuttoned against the cold. "They're sending a retrieval team from D.C., he said quietly. "Classified handoff." Her jaw tightened. Classified means buried. He nodded, "Probably." She kept her eyes on the horizon. That's what they do best. By noon the base had turned into a stage. Inspectors in pressed uniforms walked through the wreckage with clipboards and cameras. Reporters weren't allowed, but everyone knew this story would never see daylight anyway. Captain Ward's name never appeared in the after-action summary. Official cause of death, combat engagement, hostile fire. The words felt like another bullet. Knight spent hours arguing with command through encrypted channels, demanding declassification, accountability. But each call ended the same way, with static, then silence. When he returned to the infirmary that evening, Sarah was still awake, sitting by a cot where a wounded private slept under sedation. Her hands were folded in her lap, eyes distant. "You should rest," Knight said gently. She shook her head. "He's barely breathing. I'll rest when he does." Knight hesitated. "You can't save everyone." "I know," she said softly, "but I can try." He studied her a moment. "You sound like him." Her lips twitched in a faint, broken smile. Then maybe he did something right. 2 days later, the official investigators arrived, 4 of them, suits instead of uniforms. They called themselves Defense Oversight Division, but Sarah could tell by their posture that they were intelligence, not military. People who spoke in half sentences and documented nothing. The debrief took hours. They asked the same questions in slightly different ways. Describe the engagement. Who fired first? Did Colonel Knight authorize lethal response? Did you confirm target identity? Sarah kept her answers short, neutral, disciplined. Return fire. Standard rules of engagement. Hostile force neutralized. Not a word about her father, not a word about Echo. When the lead investigator closed the folder, his expression gave nothing away. "Lieutenant Hayes, Command has decided to place you on administrative reassignment pending medical clearance. You'll remain at Camden until transport arrives." She nodded once. "Yes, sir." As he left, Knight lingered by the doorway. When the others were gone, he said quietly, "They're erasing him, just like before." Sarah's eyes stayed fixed on the empty hallway. "Then we remember him ourselves." That night she couldn't sleep. The base generator hummed like a heartbeat beneath the floor. She opened her father's old journal again, the pages stained, edges torn from snow and blood. She flipped to the last blank page and began to write. He died the same way he lived, trying to protect people who didn't understand him. They'll say he went rogue, they'll call him a threat, but I know better. He was proof that precision doesn't have to kill empathy. She closed the book and pressed it against her chest. The sound of distant wind filled the room, whispering through cracked windows. Somewhere out there, the mountain kept his secrets, but she still had his words and her own promise. 3 weeks later, a convoy arrived to transport her and Knight to headquarters for final clearance. The base looked almost normal again. Repaired fences, new faces, fresh uniforms that didn't know what had happened here. Knight walked beside her toward the helipad. "You still have that drive?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. The small encrypted device hung from a chain under her shirt. "Everything's on it. Ward's logs, the project files." He exhaled. "Good. Once we're back in D.C., we'll find someone who will actually listen." She gave a humorless laugh. "And when they do?" Knight smiled faintly. "Then we go quiet. People forget stories, but they don't forget ghosts." The ride to D.C. took them across landscapes that looked too peaceful to hold such violence. Frozen rivers, wide plains, small towns lit with Christmas lights. Through the window, Sarah watched life go on, untouched. It felt wrong that the world could look so ordinary when hers had cracked open. Knight noticed her staring. "You thinking about him?" She nodded. "Always." "What do you think he'd say right now?" She smiled faintly. "That I'm wasting good ammo by staring out a window." They both laughed softly, the first real laugh in weeks, but underneath it the ache stayed. In D.C., everything smelled of disinfectant and politics. They were escorted into a sterile conference room deep in the Pentagon's sublevels. The walls hummed faintly, soundproofing. 2 men and 1 woman waited at the table, all wearing badges marked National Defense Advisory Council. Knight placed the drive on the table. "This is what's left of Project Echo. You'll find proof of illegal human trials, psychological warfare algorithms, field data manipulation." The woman interrupted. "We're aware of Echo's legacy, Colonel. It was decommissioned 15 years ago." Knight leaned forward, then explained the bodies in Colorado. No one spoke. One of the men adjusted his glasses. "Your report is compelling, but without verifiable metadata, there's no chain of custody. These files could be fabricated." Sarah's temper flared. "You think I fabricated my father's death?" The woman's tone stayed clinical. "We're saying this material compromises national security if made public. We'll review it internally." Knight's jaw tightened. "That means bury it." The woman stood. "You've both served honorably. Let us handle it from here." When they were escorted out, Knight didn't speak for a long time. Finally, in the elevator, he said quietly, "You were right. They'll bury it again." Sarah's voice was calm but cold. "Then we find another way." She didn't go back to Fort Camden. Instead, she took extended leave, officially for recovery, unofficially to disappear. Knight covered for her, filed the reports, made the calls. He owed her that much. Months passed. The news cycle moved on. The military renamed Camden Outpost 47, rebuilt it, reassigned command. No one mentioned Echo again. But whispers spread in small circles about a woman who could shoot farther than anyone on record, who worked off-book for humanitarian extractions, medical evacuations in war zones no one admitted existed. They called her the Ghost's daughter. And in every rumor, she never fired unless there was no other choice. One night in the Syrian desert, years later, Sarah found herself on another ridge, wind sweeping sand over her boots. A convoy of hostages was being marched through a canyon below, lit by torchlight. Her spotter whispered, "Targets aligned." Through the scope, she saw the leader, weapon raised toward a prisoner. Her finger hovered over the trigger. The distance was perfect, the math simple, but then she saw the prisoner's face, terrified, young, human. She exhaled and lowered the rifle. "Hold fire," she said. Her spotter looked at her. "We'll lose them. Better than losing ourselves." They waited until the convoy reached the valley bend, and then she called for the ground team. No bullets, just timing, precision without death. When the hostages were free, she walked alone under the starlight, the desert quiet around her. She could almost hear her father's voice in the wind. "The hardest shot is the one you don't take." Back in Washington, Knight sat in a quiet office, a small envelope on his desk. No return address. Inside was a photograph, Sarah, standing beside a group of rescued children, smiling faintly. On the back, a single line in familiar handwriting. "Ghosts don't vanish, they guide." Knight smiled, folded the photo, and looked out the window toward the horizon. Somewhere out there she was still fighting, not for medals, not for redemption, but for balance. Between weapon and healer, between precision and mercy. Months later at Arlington, Sarah returned one last time. Her father's grave had no name, just a number. The government still called him classified remains, but she knew. She knelt, set the old M1911 on the headstone, and whispered, "You can rest now. I'll take it from here." The wind moved through the trees, soft, approving, familiar. She smiled faintly, wiped her tears, and stood. As she walked away, the camera of her memory panned wide, endless rows of stones, sunlight on white marble, the faint echo of footsteps fading into distance. Her voice, steady and quiet, filled the silence. "He taught me that precision was about control, but he forgot to say that mercy takes more of it. In the end, it wasn't the shot that defined him. It was the silence after, and maybe that's the real legacy, to protect without needing to be seen." She paused, looking back once more. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, she disappeared into the light, leaving only the whisper of snow and the memory of a promise kept. Why did silence start to feel like peace? Years had passed since Fort Camden. The headlines had long faded, the missions had changed names, and most of the people who'd fought beside her had scattered into other wars, other duties, other ghosts. But Sarah Hayes still woke before dawn, the way soldiers do who can't quite let the habit die. Only now there were no alarms, no briefings, no orders, just the wind across the cliffs of southern Alaska and the slow thaw of ice on rock. She lived near the edge of a fjord, in a cabin built from old pine and solitude, a satellite dish on the roof, a short-wave radio she rarely turned on. Every morning she stepped outside with a mug of black coffee and watched the horizon turn gold. The mountains looked nothing like Colorado, but the quiet was the same. It felt like her father's kind of country, unspoken, unforgiving, beautiful because it demanded respect. Inside, above the small wood stove, hung one photograph. Jack Hayes in uniform, smiling at a girl who looked about 16. Next to it, a folded note in faded ink. "You'll know peace not when you stop fighting, but when you stop needing to win." She stopped needing to win, but the fight, the right kind, never really left her. Sometimes the radio still buzzed. Not with orders, not with commands, but with calls for help that traveled on strange channels. Humanitarian convoys pinned down in forgotten valleys, rescue pilots lost in storms. They came from people who didn't know her name, who only knew a voice that always answered. "This is Guardian 7. Copy your coordinates." That was the name she used now, Guardian 7. It wasn't a rank, not even a call sign, it was a promise. When the world called, she went quietly, efficiently, without papers or recognition. Her rifle was different now, smaller, lighter, adapted for non-lethal suppression rounds. She carried it the way medics carry defibrillators, as a tool to keep hearts beating, not to stop them. She saved a lot of lives that way, and she never missed. One winter night, a storm rolled in from the coast, heavy and fast. She secured the shutters, checked the radio, and listened to the wind tear at the roof. It reminded her of another storm, Fort Camden's last night. The snow, the gunfire, the choice she couldn't forget. She poured herself a drink and sat by the window. The journal she'd kept since that day lay open on the table, pages filled with field notes, medical sketches, fragments of thoughts that never found a home. She wrote, "It still feels like he's watching. Not the way ghosts do, not with guilt, but with patience, like he's waiting to see if I finally understand." She paused, staring at the ink as it bled slightly into the paper. Then she wrote the line that had haunted her for years. "He taught me to shoot to protect life, not pride. Maybe that's all the legacy anyone needs." In D.C., Colonel Knight had retired 2 years earlier. He spent his days giving guest lectures at military academies about leadership ethics under uncertainty. The cadets loved him, the old man who'd seen everything and still believed in decency. But on his desk sat a locked drawer that only he opened. Inside were 3 things: the encrypted drive Sarah had given him, a folded flag, and a sealed envelope labeled Camden Personal. Sometimes he'd take the photo from the envelope, the one of Sarah standing in that desert with the rescued children, and look at it for a long time. He'd whisper, "Still guarding, huh?" Then he'd pour himself coffee, stare out the window, and imagine her somewhere under the same sky. A year later, Knight's heart finally gave out while walking along the Potomac. No ceremony by his request. The Defense Department issued a short statement, 6 lines long, most of it forgettable. But 3 weeks after his funeral, Sarah received a small package delivered by an anonymous courier. Inside was a letter written in his steady handwriting. "I kept my promise. The truth about Echo won't vanish again. I left the files where no one will think to look, inside the ethics curriculum. Every cadet who studies the code of conduct will learn what happens when conscience is replaced by obedience. You don't have to fight anymore, Sarah, just live." Beneath the letter lay an old military medal, Knight's Bronze Star, with a note taped to it. "Return it to someone who earns it the right way." She folded the letter carefully, pressed it to her chest, and smiled through quiet tears. For the first time, the war inside her felt still. Spring came late to Alaska. When the ice finally cracked on the river, she loaded her pack, took her father's journal, and hiked up the ridge behind the cabin. It was steep, silent, the air clean enough to hurt. At the summit, she built a small cairn of stones. No marker, no name, just a place. She set the journal beneath the top stone and whispered, "You can rest here, Dad." The wind rose, carrying snow dust into the sun. She closed her eyes, hearing his voice one last time, not as command, not as memory, but as peace. "The mountain doesn't hide enemies, Sarah. It hides opportunities." She smiled. "Then I guess I finally found mine." That evening she returned to the cabin and switched on the radio. Static filled the room. Then a voice, distant, frightened, broke through. "Mayday, Mayday, Coastal Medical Team down, coordinates 61.7 north, 158 west, to any response." She hesitated only long enough to pull on her jacket and grab the pack by the door. "Guardian 7 copies," she said into the mic. "Hold position, help's coming." Outside, the snow had started again, faint and silver in the moonlight. She slung the pack across her shoulder and headed for the small bush plane waiting at the frozen inlet. The engine coughed to life, echoing through the valley. As the plane lifted off, the radio crackled once more with static that almost sounded like a voice she knew, faint, proud, familiar. "You were always the better shot." She laughed quietly, still arguing, huh? The clouds swallowed the plane, leaving only the fatting sound of propellers and the trace of a smile on the wind. Far below, in a training hall at West Point, a young cadet flipped through a digital ethics module. Halfway down the page was a quote credited simply to LT. "Call Knight, posthumous entry. Precision without conscience is a weapon. Conscience without precision is a wish. The duty of a soldier is to hold both steady." The cadet paused, reading it twice before highlighting the line. He didn't know it was born from blood and snow, but maybe he didn't need to. Maybe that was the point. That night back in Alaska, the wind died. The stars came out countless, sharp, endless. Sarah landed the plane near the stranded medics, treated their wounds, waited until the rescue chopper arrived. As the rotor wash lifted snow around her, one of the rescued doctors grabbed her hand. "Who are you?" he asked over the noise. She smiled beneath her frost-covered hood. "Just someone my dad trained." Then she turned and walked toward the dark ridge, her shadow long against the snow. Weeks later, the same doctor wrote an article for a humanitarian journal, "The Woman Who Came from the Storm." No photos, no proof. Just a story about a figure who appeared out of nowhere, saved lives, and vanished again. Some readers called it fiction. Others swore it sounded like the legend of the ghost's daughter. Either way, the story spread, not in headlines but in whispers. And sometimes that's how truth survives best, in the spaces between disbelief and hope. Years later, when the cabin finally fell silent for good, local rescuers found it exactly as she'd left it. A rifle cleaned and locked. A first aid kit packed and labeled. A single page pinned to the wall above the stove. It read, "If anyone finds this place, take what you need. Leave what you don't. The world keeps breaking, fix what you can." Signed only, S.H. The narrator's voice slows, softer now, almost a whisper carried by the wind. Some stories don't end with medals or headlines. They end quietly, in a cabin on a cliff, in a lesson that lives longer than memory. My father once said the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody sees coming. Maybe he was right, but I think the most powerful one is the person who chooses not to shoot when they could. A pause, snow falling, music swelling just enough to feel like forgiveness. He was a soldier. I was his daughter. Together we learned that the sharpest aim isn't with the eye, it's with the heart. The final beat lingers, a breath, a heartbeat, a silence that says everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.